Hi guys, welcome to workshop 5. Today we are going to be talking about fats. When I told my students that I was going to be teaching this class, they wanted me to show you guys my science shirt because they like that I wear my science shirts during class. So I wore one for you too. All right, let's jump in. I think this is an interesting topic because back in the 1980s and 90s, there was a lot of diets being promoted that were low fat. And this idea, I think, is just still kind of stuck around. Now, I want to be clear. Fats do contain more energy than carbohydrates and proteins. That is true. But there are good fats and there are bad fats. And I think that eating a diet that is high in the good fats can be very satiating, very delicious. So let's go talk about some of these sources. So let's start with, sorry, hiding my meeting controls. Talking about some of the good fats. So we can get fats from both animal sources and from plant sources. Our animal sources for good fats can be our grass-fed beef. Most of you are probably familiar with like salmon, sardines, oysters. Like a lot of our seafood is going to be high in our healthy fats. Our plant oils like olive oil, avocado oil, nuts and seeds. These are all going to be rich in healthy fats. And when we switch over to the other side, if you're looking at more of our processed foods, and a lot of our meats are going to contain some of the fats that we consider bad. Okay. Oh, and fried food. I can't forget fried food. All right. So what is the role of fats in our body? Well, it's very important. It has lots and lots of functions. The thing I think about the most when I think about fats is definitely the structure of our cell membranes. They're made up of fats, and we'll talk a little bit about that in a moment. These are messaging molecules. These are, this would incorporate our fat-soluble vitamins, which have lots of different important functions that we discussed in a previous week. Our fats make up our bile acids that helps us digest our food. And some of our fats make up our steroid hormones. This would be like estrogen, and progesterone, and pregnenolone, and aldosterone. These are all really important hormones for reproduction, for water regulation, things like that. So definitely something that we need in our diet. In fact, we have our essential lipids. That means that we need to actually consume them within our diet. Let's do a little chemistry. So I'm sure you've heard of saturated fats and unsaturated fats. I don't think it's really important that you remember which one's which, but I'll just give you guys a little background. So saturated fats, we call them saturated because they're just covered in hydrogen, right? Like if I were to count the carbon and hydrogen in this molecule versus this molecule, I would see that because this one has this double bond right here, I end up with less hydrogen. So we call that unsaturated. It's not covered in hydrogen the same way the saturated fat is. Okay, you'll note that because it has all these hydrogen, the structure tends to be pretty like straight and uniform. Okay, so I have this little model here as well. So you can see that they just kind of stack on top of each other. So these would actually be solid at room temperature. So if I put on here this classic model that I'm sure you've seen in a science class before. I've got my solid where everything's very ordered, liquid, things are a little bit more random, and then gas is really random. So if we were to take a whole bunch of these molecules, they tend to look more like this, like a solid. Okay, so this would be like butter or the fats in animal protein, things like that. Versus our unsaturated fats, because we have this kink in the bond, it's a little more disordered. So it's more likely that these are going to be a liquid at room temperature. Okay, so if you think about stacking those up, those are going to have a little bit more disorder, look a little bit more like this. So this would be like our plant oils, like olive oil. that'd be an example of an unsaturated fat. We also can have mono unsaturated fats versus polyunsaturated fats. We call them MUFAs and PUFAs. And that's referring to the number of double bonds. So this one would be a mono unsaturated fat because it only has one, versus this one has more than one. That'd be poly. Okay, so health concerns with these. So saturated fats, I wouldn't say that you have to avoid them completely. In fact, I can think of tons of foods that have saturated fats that are really good for you, like eggs, for example, or coconut oil. I would say that if you have a genetic predisposition to high cholesterol or an unfavorable lipid panel, then maybe you want to make sure that you're keeping these at a low enough number. But if you don't have a genetic predisposition, you don't have to be as cognizant about it. You don't have to avoid foods just because they have saturated fats, because sometimes they might have lots of other health benefits. Okay, so saturated fats, though, if you consume too much, it can increase your LDL levels, which would be your lousy cholesterol. Unsaturated fats tend to reduce our LDL and increase our HDL, which I call our healthy cholesterol. Okay. All right. Let's talk about the difference between omega-3 and omega-6. I'll keep this short. So here are our main omega-3 fatty acids. ALA is the one that we get from our plant sources. EPA and DHA predominantly are going to come from seafood, but we can also get them from algae sources like chlorella, spirulina, things like that. Omega-6 fatty acids, these come in lots of different types of foods. And what the difference is between these is where we find that first double bond. So we call this an omega-3 fatty acid because we find that double bond on the third carbon, versus the omega-6, we found it on the sixth carbon. So what is the importance of these? Well, both of these are essential fatty acids, meaning we can't make them in our body. We need to consume them from our diet. I do want to note, if you are only consuming plant-based omega-3 fatty acids and you're consuming this ALA, we can convert ALA into EPA and DHA because, again, we need these, but it's not done very efficiently and it takes a lot of energy. So I do consider the possibility of recommending a supplement to someone who doesn't consume foods with EPA and DHA, which is a lot of us. But I think it's interesting. It's something to be said about, where we're meant to live and how we're meant to live. You'd expect that we would all be needing to live near the water, right? If EPA and DHA are so important and they're predominantly coming from marine sources. I digress. So we want to have both omega-3s and omega-6s, but we kind of tout omega-3 fatty acids as being our anti-inflammatory fatty acids, and omega-6s are inflammatory. That's not completely true. If we have too high of a ratio of omega-6 to omega-3, then that can contribute to inflammation. But consuming omega-6 fatty acids does not necessarily cause inflammation. So the ideal ratio is somewhere between 1:1 and 1:4 of these fatty acids. However, with the standard American diet, the SAD diet, because we are consuming so many processed foods and fried foods and things like that, we are getting too many omega-6s. And so the ratio tends to look more like 1:20, 1:25, rather than 1:4. So I definitely would not recommend anybody go down that rabbit hole of trying to calculate your ratios of omega-3 to omega-6. I did for a moment. And just like I don't want you obsessing about counting calories and things like that. I want to teach you how to just eat healthfully and live your life in a way that you can maintain. And I think counting omega-6s and omega-3s is not sustainable. So I think as long as you are being cognizant of the right types of foods to eat, not eating a lot of processed foods, fried foods, then this shouldn't be too much of a concern that we're eating lots of whole foods. So here, just a little bit more on the sources of these. So we can get our omega-3s from plants or animal sources again. ALA is going to be what we find in our plant sources. We can get this from leafy greens, from avocado, from nuts, from seeds, things like that. We can also get our DHA and our EPA, and our ALA too, from animal sources like eggs and grass-fed beef, salmon, sardines, oysters. Okay, the list goes on. And these foods that I just mentioned are not going to be ones that you need to be concerned about these ratios between omega-3 and omega-6. Okay. And some of them do contain saturated fats, but again, we want to have these in moderation. We don't need to eliminate them completely. All right. So one of the ways that we process our fats is called hydrogenation, and we can have complete hydrogenation or partial hydrogenation, which this is not, we're not supposed to be using hydrogenated oils anymore because it produces what we call a trans fat, which is very, very bad for our health. So what they do is they take this unsaturated fat, which was one of our good ones, right, because it has this double bond here. And in order to make this more shelf stable, and sometimes they do these things for taste. I think, like, for example, peanut butter, when you have the more processed peanut butter, it does taste a lot better than the like organic clean one, just being honest. And it's because they do these kinds of processes. So we take this healthy fat and we make it look more like a saturated fat, or we end up making it look like a trans fat. And these are processed differently in our body, and they're going to have different health effects. A little side note again on trans fats. So what that means, what it's referring to is the conformation of this bond. Okay, so we call this, the opposite of trans would be cis. So here's our cis bond versus our trans bond. Trans fats are very bad for us. So you're not supposed to see any trans fats on any label. It should always say 0 grams because it's been banned. However, if it has less than 0.5 grams per serving, they're allowed to put 0. And I chose chips specifically because their serving sizes are so misleading. Who is eating 15 chips? Okay. I definitely am eating more than that. So what happens is if you are eating more than one serving, then you end up getting, a lot more trans fat than you thought you were getting. Oh, and you know what? I did forget something on a previous slide. Let me skip back for a second. Something else I wanted to mention about these unhealthy fats is that with the way they're structured, we are concerned about these fats instead of our healthier fats getting making up our cell membrane. So I read a study that was discussing people who have a diet higher in saturated fats. These fats end up being a part of the cell membrane instead of these ones. And as I mentioned, these are because of the way the molecule is shaped, they become like a lot more like rigid and structured. And that affects the ability for the cell to function because the cell membrane is supposed to be fluid. So that's just a little side note. I apologize that I skipped that the first time around. Okay, so we don't want these saturated fats and these trans fats making up our cell membranes. Okay, and then of course these are also going to contribute to an unfavorable lipid panel. These are going to result in higher LDL, okay, lower HDL levels. Let's talk about cholesterol for a moment. Cholesterol gets a bad rap. We have a lot of people in our country with high cholesterol, but we need cholesterol in our bodies. However, the catch is that our liver makes all of the cholesterol that we need. So then on top of that, we are consuming it in our diet. And actually the way that our cholesterol lowering medications work is it actually stops your liver from making its own cholesterol. And to me, that's a concern. And I posed that question to my husband's doctor when he was diagnosed with high cholesterol. Said, are we just operating under the assumption that no one is going to fix their diet, so we're just going to shut off your liver's processes to make cholesterol, and they're just going to stay on medication for the rest of their lives? He's like, yeah, pretty much, which is kind of disappointing because we can fix it with diet. Okay. So I also do want to point out, if you do not have a genetic predisposition to cholesterol, eating foods like this might not actually cause you to have high cholesterol. If you do have a genetic predisposition to high cholesterol, then eating foods that contain a lot of cholesterol and that contain a lot of saturated fats, those will increase your cholesterol. I'll talk in a moment about how to battle that. So why is cholesterol important? Well, it helps compose our cell membranes. We use it to make our steroid hormones. So again, that was estrogen, progesterone, pregnenolone, aldosterone. We use it to synthesize vitamin D. It plays important roles in our nervous system and our digestive system. So it's not something that needs to be completely avoided. It's something that we definitely need for our physiology. It's just, it shouldn't be consumed in excess. So I just wanted to share with you how we approached this unfavorable lipid panel with my husband. So here I have our guidelines of where we want cholesterol to be. And you can see that at the time when he was first diagnosed with high cholesterol, his numbers were super high, very, very high. And his HDL was too low. This is the one that we want more of. His LDL is way, way, way higher than it should be. Okay, when it hits a 180 or over, that's when they're recommending a statin. So, and then we got our triglycerides, which also kind of indicate to me that there might be a little bit of insulin resistance or something going on there. So at that time, we were eating a high protein, low carb diet. We're eating animal proteins at every meal. And that means that we're going to be consuming a lot of cholesterol and potentially saturated fats. And when we saw these numbers and he was really not feeling well on a statin, we decided to go a little bit more plant-based, meaning not having as many animal products. And you can see that within just a few weeks, these test results are just a few weeks apart, we saw some pretty significant reductions. We thought, okay, what more can we do? So we went about 80% plant-based. So this is eating animal products maybe once a day. And you can see that reduced the cholesterol to still high, but in the desirable range. Right? I don't know what's going on with our HDLs. We need to figure out why we can't get his HDLs up. But look at the LDLs from 204 to 137. Okay, this isn't even a consideration for a statin at this point. Okay, 214 to 77 for the triglycerides. So I think that we were, by eating a lot more plants, we actually were consuming more omega-3s because we were just being more intentional about eating lots of different types of food that were not animal products. And of course, I'm not saying that you need to be vegan, but that it's something to be considered if you are, if you do have a genetic predisposition to high cholesterol, because what we're concerned about is getting, if we have too high of LDL, you can kind of think of these as like, okay, so they're going to be transporting cholesterol to the tissues, and you can think of the HDL as like the trash truck is supposed to come take that trash and pull it back to the liver to get rid of it. And if there's not enough of it, it can't do that job. Okay. I wanted to talk just very, very briefly about oils, and I can definitely post this for people. I am cautioning you on consuming the refined oils. Right now, the animal studies are showing that there's increased inflammation, probably because they have higher omega-6s, where it's stripping a lot of the nutrients and things as well. When we are refining the oils, they're doing different chemical processes. It looks like it causes more oxidative stress. So if we can choose an unrefined oil and get, our extra virgin olive oil and make sure that it's cold pressed, that's a better option than choosing something like canola oil or sunflower oil. And again, these were just animal studies, but for me, if I know that there's a potential for them to be harmful, that's not what I'm going to use on a daily basis. And I would prefer to use ones that we know are well researched and are very healthful. Okay, in terms of cooking with oils, you want to consider the smoke point, because you've seen, the structure of the molecule can change with heat. So then it's not maybe not going to taste the same. It's not going to have the same health benefits necessarily. So I personally like to use avocado oil when I'm cooking, because I know it has a really high smoke point, versus olive oil. Look at its smoke point's only 320 degrees. So I'm often cooking at a higher temperature than that. So I usually will be putting this on my food after I've cooked it. So just something to think about. Coconut oil also is a decent one for cooking, but if you have a genetic predisposition to high cholesterol, maybe you want to consider not using an oil that contains saturated fats. Okay, so there's a lot of it depends going on always in nutrition. All right, I think that's all I got for you guys today. Please let me know if you have any questions.